Hello again, friends, and welcome to the St. Louis Blues Hockey Legends Podcast. Tom Calhoun here again to shine a light on the stories of those instrumental in blues history. And many thanks to the blues talented organist Jeremy Boyer for setting the stage with his keyboard magic. Visit him at Jabs Music on X. On this episode, we're doing sort of a greatest hits production. We recorded bonus rounds with our last four legends, Bernie Federko, Scotty Bowman, Mike Liut, and Red Berenson. We asked them to quickly react to the names of people who were in their lives as players and coaches. The Legends Podcast is sponsored in part by the organization I work for in the summer months, the Gateway Grizzlies. I'll tell you more about their Tom Calhoun Bobblehead Night coming up on opening night next month in just a bit. But we'll start off this one with the Hall of Fame coach Scotty Bowman bonus round. So let's drop the puck with Scotty. Let me throw a few names at you, and if you would, give me a sentence or two about each of these people before we wrap things up. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
Okay. Al Arbor.
Wonderful man, a great defenseman, and a great coach, and a good friend. We got along so well, and our families became really, real close. And his wife Claire passed away in this area. After Al passed away first, so it's been you couldn't make a better person than Al Arbor. And what a hockey player he was, and ended up to be what a coach.
Red Berenson.
Well, he was probably one of the best players that I ever coached that's not in the Hall of Fame. And, he made his mark in college hockey. He was one of the first that ever could go in the NHL. He was the glue of our team as a forward, because he could play offense and defense. And he was the best player in the West Division his first 3 years in that division.
Noel Picard.
They don't make them any tougher than Noel Picard. He was a team player, and the other thing that he enjoyed doing was pulling pranks on players. And he never stopped.
It was something. How about Gordie Howe? How much were you around Gordie?
Well, his son played for me in Detroit, and I got to know him very well. And I had him in the All-Star game at 52 years of age. I've always said, if you're going to make a mold of a hockey player of all-round ability, offense, defense, toughness, you name the category, he's right at the top. And it's proved that fact that he could play hockey at a competitive level into his 50s. I don't think anybody will ever do that again.
No, I don't think so. We mentioned the Plaguers a couple of times, but a thought or two on Bob and Barkley, if you would.
Well, Bob and Barkley were two of a kind in the fact that they were so intense when they played hockey, but after they played hockey, they were different. And I separated them. I coached against Bob in junior, and Bob was always the junior one of the two. But as a brother combination, nobody would ever get between the two of those Plaguers. His younger brother was pretty good too, Billy, but he didn't play very long. But Bob and Barkley were two players that any team would have wanted at that time.
How about a couple names of guys that you've coached on other teams? How about Guy Lafleur?
Well, I mean, you talk about people that are you'd want to pay as a fan to watch very few players in the game, never mind the game. You'd want to see Guy Lafleur play. He just was a dynamic. I still feel no player did what he did for hockey, for the fans, and also for the team. that he did in the 70s. You know, I put players by the decades. He's the player of the 70s, no question about it.
How about one from the 90s, Mario Lemieux?
Well, he's special. He was so talented, and yet he had some real things to get through. He had a back surgery that didn't do very well. He had determination that he kept playing, but just a natural. I don't know if you could ever find a player again with his size. He didn't use his size in a manner that most people do, but his reach and his tendencies that he could shoot and he could pass, and he's right at the very top of the list in all-time hockey players, all right at the top.
Right. And how about let's wrap it up with Steve Yzerman from your 96-97 Red Wings.
Dedicated hockey man. He played under a lot of different situations. He never was a player that complained. He was in a class by himself because of his ultra desire. Very, very unassuming. If you get to know him, you wouldn't believe how tough a player he was for his size, and very astute and a great leader, because we would take players from other teams that were captains and no issues at all. They would mold into the team, and I would give him a lot of credit for that.
Next up on our greatest hits episode will be the great goaltender Mike Liut. I want to take a brief time out here to tell you about the Gateway Grizzlies. They are always providing family fun at their baseball park in Sauget. It's Grizzlies Ballpark, and it means fun for the entire family. It's family-oriented, and that means the pricing is family-oriented too. And they tell me they're going to do a Tom Calhoun bobblehead coming up on May the 16th. That's opening night of the upcoming Frontier League season. So I hope you'll make plans to be there and get yourself a Calhoun bobblehead. That's going to be quite the item for everybody's man cave, right? Go to GatewayGrizzlies.com and find out about the upcoming season schedule and all the wonderful promotional nights they have, including the greatest night in baseball. You don't want to miss that on Labor Day weekend. GatewayGrizzlies.com. Okay, Mike, couple thoughts about some of the people that you were associated with during your days with the Blues and elsewhere. How about Bernie Federko?
Are you looking for one word or a sentence?
Oh, couple of phrases would be good.
Bernie was a terrific talent, high skilled, very smart, able to control the game from the center position, the tempo of the game.
And he's in that Toronto Hall of Fame.
Yes, yeah. He is, as he should be.
How about Harry Ornest?
Yeah, I had such little time, with Harry. I would say carpetbagger, but that might be a little aggressive.
Let's go That's okay. Fred Berenson, who you got to do a little coaching with, right?
I did. I was his volunteer coach when Marty Turco was at Michigan. Red was your conscience. Right, he's the guy. He was the principal that caught you doing something you shouldn't be doing. Didn't say anything. Just you knew he knew. So, yeah. He was in third year in St. Louis. We had we were losing games we would have won or ended in a tie, and we were just off. We had a few. We were just behind. We wanted to go forward. We took a step back, and I overreacted one night. We had a quick meeting, and he just left me with, "Just stop the puck. That's hard enough." Right. So he was your conscience, and when you'd stretch too far in one direction or another, or if you weren't putting enough into it.
That's why he's such a great coach, I guess, too.
Mm.
Yeah. You mentioned this guy during our podcast, and I'm curious about, because we don't talk about him enough, and he died way too early, of course, and the 14 Fund is in his honor. Doug Wickenheiser.
Yeah, Doug was, I played, I don't know, maybe a year and a half with Doug, something like that. It wasn't a long time. Um, Rob Ramage wanted me to play in the 3-on-3 in Calgary, the NHL retired, alumni 3-on-3. I told him, forget it. It's not a place for goalies. And in his trying to convince me, I said, Rammer, I'll come back and play when you have a benefit game for Wick. Mm-hmm. Right, which he did. Like 3 weeks later, he called me up. He said, okay, you're on. Yeah. So Doug was, really talented player who went to Montreal and I think played under a tremendous amount of pressure because they didn't take Dennis Savard. And I just think that's just a crippling weight for a young or any person to have to bear. And particularly when he didn't, certainly didn't ask for it. I said that there were a number of things that happened to me that all led to the NHL. And if Doug had gone somewhere else as the number 2 overall pick, I think his career would have been appreciably different. I just think that a young player playing with that type of pressure in a place like Montreal at that time is suffocating. And I don't think we ever really got to see how great a player Doug Wickenheiser was.
A little bit of research tells me that Ron Francis is a cousin of yours. Tell us about Ron.
Well, Ron, my father, when he immigrated to Canada, they immigrated to Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. My dad left after the war. He started his life, his adult life, married life in Toronto. So I did not know Ron growing up at all. His mother, on my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary, his mother babysat for my younger brother and I. And when I came to Hart, I knew about Ron because my dad had mentioned him. He was playing junior in the Sioux, and Ronnie's just he's highly skilled, Hall of Fame, of course, highly skilled, highly intelligent center, like Bernie, control the pace of the game, make wingers better, utilize the people around him, play the point on the power play. He was one of those all-purpose, guys, right? When he went to Pittsburgh, he was now not the number 1 guy on the team. And I told him, you're going to score 90 plus points, and they're going to be the easiest 90 points you've ever scored. Nobody's going to see you coming, right? And I told him, I said, the thing that angers me is we have to go through you in the second round when I was in Washington. That's not going to go well for us. And we got beat twice in the same, and they've just had a phenomenal team. But, that to take a player like Ron, right, who was, the kid that grew up in Hartford and he was the number 1 guy, and then you fit him into Mario and Yager, and Steven and Joey Mull, all the great players that they had on that team, but he could fit in seamlessly. That speaks volumes about the hockey intelligence of that individual. That is not an easy deal right there. He was, Ron is, he's a frontline guy. He's the top guy on your team, and he just fit right in there for 2 years. It just made them, scary.
The great Red Berenson is up next on our Greatest Hits episode. How about Brian Sutter?
Brian Sutter, heart and soul, a captain, a leader, and no question he would be a coach that you would love your son to play for.
Bernie Federko.
Federko was talented as any player the Blues have had, and deceivingly, he didn't look like a great skater, but could he ever skate? And he made so many great passes and plays. Everybody thought he was just
a playmaker. He was a scorer who could make plays.
Glenn Hall.
As good a goalie as I've ever seen. The three best goalies I saw in my life were Terry Sawchuk, Glenn Hall, and Jacques Plante in any order on a given night. But Glenn could stand on his head for our team, which he did in St. Louis as an older goalie.
And he won the Conn Smythe Trophy after a losing series in the Stanley Cup Final back in the day. Noel Picard.
As big and tough as they come, and yet he had the heart of a gentleman. He was just a great teammate. He had a great sense of humor. He was just a little kid in a big body.
Here's one that's a little different than the rest. How about Steve Durbano?
Boy, I crossed over a little bit with Durbano, but mostly played against him. But it was like he had escaped from somewhere, and I'm not sure where. But he had the talent. He had a lot of things going for him, but he got sidetracked in his career. He could have been a much better player.
In our discussion with Gary Unger, the name Bob Gassoff came up, of course, the terrible accident in '77. What are your thoughts about Gasser?
Gasser is tougher per pound than any player I played with or against, and fearless. And he was a boy from the north. You talk about a lumberjack coming out of the North Country in British Columbia. He was that guy. And you know, the ending to that story, Tom, is his son Bobby, who lives in St. Louis, a very successful businessman, a Navy SEAL, and a graduate from University of Michigan. I had young Bobby for 4 years, and we just love him.
Yeah, I forgot about that. My bad. I should have brought that up. All right, you got to play a little bit with Gordie Howe. What are your thoughts about Mr. Howe?
Howe was a natural. He had the natural physical talent, and he had the mental toughness and the fearlessness and the meanness of what it took to be a superstar in those days. And Gordie, and yet he was a gentleman. Like, he lived next door to an old lady, and he had a family and so on. But when we had snowstorms in Detroit, he was over there shoveling her driveway with he wouldn't even tell her. He would just shovel her driveway. And he was such a great guy, but a natural athlete. He could hit a golf ball a mile, and he could hit a baseball out of the stadium.
Yeah, Unger told us he got to play with both Howe and, towards the end of his career, Gretzky. So he was a lucky guy there.
Wow.
I bring this one up because I think he's one of the nicest guys I've ever had the pleasure to be around. And he was on your 80-81 team, Joe Micheletti.
Yeah, no question. I coached Joe, and as you know, and he was a skilled young defenseman and just finding his way in the NHL. But I got to know him more through his coverage of the New York Rangers all these years. But he's a gentleman. I've met his brother, and of course his family now. Everybody gets older and everybody grows up, but Joe still looks good, and he's a tribute to everything he's done.
Yeah, I was kind of a colleague of Joe's back when he got his broadcasting career started. When I was working with Dan Kelly at KXOK back in the 80s, and Dan kind of picked out Joe and figured he'd be a pretty good broadcaster, and off he went on his broadcasting career. Now I'm going to ask you about a couple of your Michigan players. How about Dylan Larkin?
Well, Dylan was a Michigan kid, like a Detroit raised kid. So we got to see him as he was moving up in the ranks as a 15-year-old and then a 16. Then he played in the development program here. And he just separated himself with his enthusiasm, his work ethic, and then his speed. Like, he loved to work, and his skating just got better and better. But he's a true leader in Detroit now. He came up at a time when Zetterberg and Datsuk and all those guys were retiring, and the mantle has fallen on his shoulders. But he's carrying it well, and their team has a chance this year. But I'm a big fan of Dylan's.
Another of your players, I think you only had 1 year with him, but he's still one of the league's stars right now, Jacob Trouba.
Trouba was another 1 year player. Trouba was too good for college hockey when he came. It was amazing. He was a man playing with boys, and his shot, his checks, everything he did, he was just way ahead of most of the other players. But you didn't see it from the stands as much as you did from a coaching perspective every day, seeing him on the ice. So Jacobs made everybody proud, and good for him. Now, Tom, I don't want to forget about Dan Kelly. You mentioned Dan Kelly. He was my favorite announcer. He was great. He could make a baseball game sound exciting. And it wasn't an act, it was just his natural voice and his interest in the game and the players. And he was just, the first time I met him was in Ottawa, Hull, Ottawa, when I was playing with Jimmy Roberts for Scotty Bowman. And Dan Kelly was the announcer there. And so I didn't appreciate him then, but when we were in St. Louis and Scotty told me we were going to try and get Dan Kelly, I thought, oh, that'll be great. Dan Kelly, he's good. Well, he became a lot better and well known when he got to St. Louis and became the voice of the Blues. So we love him. We love Fran and the family. We miss them, but another great St. Louis Blues.
Yeah, we had John and young Dan on the podcast back in December, and they made sure I knew that Scotty Bowman recruited Dan to come to St. Louis back in the days.
Yep.
Well, let's leave it with this last personality. Everybody fell in love and still loves, even though he's gone, Bob Plager. What are your thoughts about Bobby?
Yeah, Bob he was a work of art, and they threw away the mold after he got out. But Bob was a better player than people thought. He was tougher. He was fun-loving. He was a team character, or sometimes clown. But boy, when he decided he was going to make sure the team was on his back, he could put it on his back. He was fearless, like Barkley, like Brian Sutter, like Bobby Gassoff. But Bob Plager knew the game. He was more of a student of the game than anybody realized. And he again looked up to people like Doug Harvey and Scotty Bowman. And Bob was a great guy. We miss him.
Yes, we do. You see him all the time on FanDuel Sports Midwest analyzing the games. Let's get his thoughts about some of the people in his career from the great Bernie Federko. Red Berenson, what do you have to say about Red?
Well, Red was one of those guys all those older guys. Red was one of the guys that when I came up, Red's, 12 or 15 years older than me. I was 20 years old when I came in. Red was 35 years old. And Red taught me how to work. These guys were workaholics. They skated and skated and skated. And I think as a kid, you come in, you're full of piss and vinegar. You don't really even care what's going on. And it's the older guys like Red that said, hey, you know what? You got to get your nose to the grindstone. This is what you do. Those were the guys that leaders on the team that said, hey, you know what? You can't take the night off. You can't take the shift off. And that's something that Red taught me as a player then. And then when Red became a coach, the same way. We didn't see eye to eye lots of times because he was hard-nosed. But what Red was doing was what he's supposed to do. He's the coach of the hockey team, and he wants to get the best out of each and every player. And I think as you get older, you learn about that and you respect it even more. So Red was really, really good for me at the beginning of my career.
And he told us he never really wanted to be a coach, and he turned out to be one of the great coaches in college hockey of all time.
And you know what, Tom, that we said that when he left here and went to play to coach at Michigan, we said the same thing. I think it's a lot harder to when you have pros that are getting paid, it's, I think, a lot more difficult to discipline them and to get them to play hard. But I think when you're dealing with kids trying to make it, I think Red couldn't have been better because Red knew exactly what buttons to push.
What about Gary Unger? He was on the podcast recently. What do you have to say about Ungie?
Ungie Ungie really took me under his wing right off the bat. Ungie was really the star of this hockey club. And I can remember going out for dinner with him. We'd go to certain places, and Ungie was really popular in town. And when some people would come up
to Ungie and say, hey, could you sign this? He would always make sure that they passed it over to me to sign. And I was kind of embarrassed. I mean, I was nobody. I didn't want to sign the same napkin that Gary did. But Ungie said, no, Bernie, you're going to learn the right way and you're going to do it. And you sign your name to make sure that the people can read it and know what it says on there. And Ungie was great. I mean, Ungie was the type of player that was a goal scorer. I mean, I was totally different. I mean, I scored goals, but my goal was to make sure everybody around me was going to score goals. I was the center iceman. Ungie was the scorer. So we kind of balanced each other. Was really good. So I was the kind of the passer. He was a scorer. We played together for a couple of years, and I loved Ungie. He still is to this day. Every time I see him, I get a charge on him. He's a funny guy, and we have a lot of great stories.
Yeah, he was good on on the podcast here recently too. Bobby Plager.
Well, Bobby, and you know what, Bobby was, I mean, I love Bark to death. I mean, Bark was my hero. Bark took me under his wing. He was my dad, my older brother, whatever you want to call him. And I could sit in a room with Bark and we could yell at each other. And at the end of the conversation, hug and walk away. And after Bark was gone, Bobby became that same kind of older brother to me. Bobby was always there. We have conversations together. Bobby would come over late night. We'd have a chat or two, a beer or two, and talk about things. And I can't say enough about Bobby. Bobby, especially the run we had in the Stanley Cup back in 2019, being with Bobby each and every night in Boston, on the trips all over Dallas. I can't say enough about the way his heart was. I mean, Bobby only wanted to win, only wanted the Blue Note to win. And I was so as happy as I was for myself, for the Blues organization, for the fans here in St. Louis. I was probably more happy that Bobby Plager finally got that Stanley Cup back in 2019.
Yeah, that was really great stuff. One more. How about Brian Sutter?
Tom, Brian and I have had a relationship that I don't think that anybody could really ever say that unless you're a brother with somebody. And Brian and I mean, we came out of junior playing out in the Western Canada Hockey League. We played against each other. He was the captain of Lethbridge. I was captain of the Blades, and we didn't like each other. We played in the playoffs the last year. We beat them. We played in the All-Star game together. He was on my left wing. You mentioned Don Murdoch. Don Murdoch was on my right wing in the All-Star game as well. But Brian and I had something that probably no one can really kind of emulate. We did everything together. We came up through the minors. We played on the same line. We were roomies. We lived across the street from each other. With our, in the same neighborhood. So we had our great times, and we both wanted to win. We were so delighted and happy to be able to play for the St. Louis Blues. But as life goes on, when Brian got the opportunity to be coach, and I actually was the one that talked him into being coach. Jack Quinn called me, and Ron Caron said, hey, can you tell Brian we'd like him to coach? And Brian didn't want to stop playing. He didn't want to coach. And I basically was the one that talked him into getting that opportunity to come out of playing at this level and go right into coaching. It was a very special moment for him. But as things happen, when you become the boss, things change. You're the coach. I'm the player. We're the team. He's management. So things changed with us. And that's just the way it went. So I guess our close relationship changed. We'll always be friends. We don't talk to each other that much. But it was something that it's management, you know what? And he had to make that decision. And when you know what being a boss is, Tom, when you're the boss, you make the decision. You're the employee. I'm the employee. I do what I'm told to do. And that's kind of the way it went. And unfortunately, we're not close like we used to be. During those years, but such is life, and I'll always respect what he did and what he did for me, and I'm sure that he does the same thing that I did for him.
A lot of us would like to see him around St. Louis a little more and involved with the team a little more, but he's kind of does his own thing these days, away from hockey.
Yeah, it's strange, Tom, and that's really disappointing because I mean he's still very very much loved here in St. Louis, and it just seems that ever since that he left St. Louis when he got fired from the Blues. I mean he had a great career as a coach, going on to Chicago and Boston and Calgary, whatever it is, but he's been invited by the alumni many times to come back, and for whatever reason he came back for the Winter Classic, but he didn't come back for the Hall of Fame induction. And that's just kind of the way Brian is, and that's in my opinion, that's his loss that he's not here in St. Louis because, as you said, everybody would love to have him come back here.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks for being with me for another episode of the St. Louis Blues Hockey Legends Podcast. We'll have another legend coming up soon, so stay tuned to our social media for news on who that legend might be. Visit PAGuyTom.com or BluesHockeyLegends.com and sign up for our Legends email notifications. The Legends podcast is also available on the Scoops Sports Network at scoopswithdannymac.com. Video of the podcast is published the Monday after the Friday release of the audio. As always, please like and share on Facebook, X, and Instagram, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It all keeps the Legends podcast alive and well. Tom Calhoun here saying thanks for being a fan, and let's go Blues!